Correggio was a very pioneering artist in the same era. What he's famous for is this extreme use of light perspective. Here we have the baby Jesus glowing, almost like radioactive material here, and the very brilliant light is reflected in Mary's face, and it's making this person wince. It's so bright. This person is looking away, but this shepherd who's coming to worship the baby Jesus is awed by the scene. And of course here we have some angels singing on high, and the light is reflecting up there too. The nature of this is to focus so much attention here on this very brilliant light, once again in the center, and by contrast everything else is in shadow and dark. Of this light doing sort of a sideways silhouette on this. We see this side of this person well illuminated and this side very much in shadow. Something else you might take a look at here, there is a kind of a balance and a symmetry to this. Here's this person standing in this position, and it's kind of echoed by this person back here. So you get this effect of somebody close and somebody far, kind of a diagonal there. And also if you take a look at it, here's an area of the painting that has something special in it, and this is a rather arbitrary sort of a thing. It didn't have to be drawn that way, this bunch of earth here and these plants on it, but in a way it takes and does the same thing with this corner that's done with this corner of the painting. So that too in a way frames this in a symmetrical way. This is a sketch as if you're looking up and seeing the Virgin Mary being sucked up into heaven. A rather undignified pose because really you're looking up at this person and her legs are dangling here. This was a study, one of many, for this, the Assumption of the Virgin, a fresco in this cupola, which is the dome, that is the upper area, the rounded upper area of a church. And what Correggio was out to do here was to awe the people who were sitting underneath this, as if a hole had opened up here in the heavens. And you see receding into the distance all of these people who were being sucked up. And here, the Virgin Mary, you see in this very undignified pose, her legs hanging out here and her body just sort of foreshortened from the bottom to the top. And all of these bodies foreshortened as if this is receding far into the distance, this upward force drawing them up into heaven. So once again, this is the way it looks without those ugly lines on there. This is all painted on to give this impression of depth. And because it's exaggerated in such a way, it's a magnificent way to engage the viewer with this very dramatic perspective that probably had not been seen by anyone before. This kind of an effect of this drama of what's happening up above you. And this final figure is really the end piece on page 339 of your textbook. I just thought it was rather funny, a little bit humorous here, because what's happening is this painting by Veronese, he's painted himself into it, and some of his friends, Bassano, Tintoretto, and Titian. And of course they've sort of flattered themselves by being the musicians at a wedding feast, and here's Jesus. So they've painted themselves as they much the same as they had otherwise painted donors. I have enhanced this picture a bit in putting it in here as a slide to enhance the saturation of the colors. If you compare this to what you see on page 339, page 339 is a little bit duller. I think this might be a little closer to the way that Veronese had in mind when he painted it, once again with these very brilliant pigments that were available to the Venetian painters. I've included here just a couple of extra slides because we have considered in this unit and in the prior unit colorants. I just wanted to emphasize the fact that what you're seeing here as far as primary colors for pigments are known as the historical primaries. They're not actually accurate. They will mix to these intermediate colors, but now we know them not to be the actual primary colors. Painters use these, and still instruction is directed at this, but in fact, a more enlightened painter might mix colors a different way. Of course, the effect is really what you're after, so if the colors mixed here are what's intended by the artist, nothing wrong with that. But when we move in to study printing processes, it becomes much more important to understand what the real primary colors are and how they mix in the printing process to produce the full range of colors. And that's why these primary colors are not used in commercial color printing. And these are in fact the light mixing colors red, blue, and green mixed to make yellow, magenta, and a turquoise called cyan. The symmetry that's involved here is that if yellow, magenta, and cyan are used as pigments, they will mix to produce these three outer colors. And that makes sense because pigments as subtractive light intensity mixing and color mixing this way with light, adding to light intensity, really do complement each other. There's a symmetry there that seems to be part of the natural order of things. Finally, Caravaggio, very famous artist, very flamboyant artist with a very active engagement with the authorities because of his rebellious nature. This is a very interesting painting that for hundreds of years was thought to be lost, and it was found very much covered with varnish that had yellowed, and it wasn't even recognized as the masterpiece it was. And only a few years ago was this discovered and then cleaned up and made available on display, The Taking of Christ. What's interesting about this is Caravaggio is carrying on this very same unique kind of use of light here, reflecting off metal. Very intense light perspective, light coming in here, shining on these faces and leaving so much else in the dark. Very dramatic moment. The reason I'm showing you this is Caravaggio is typical of one school of thought that developed an art that considered realism and the dramatic use of art and subjects pictured in ways that perhaps some people thought as undignified. That school of art was distinctly the rebellious school. That wasn't the name of it, but these were the rebels. The orthodox school of art centered on a painter named Annibale Carracci, and it dealt with classical themes, a continuation of the adoration of Greek and Roman forms, the fact that there was a certain way to brush paint onto the canvas, there was a certain way to depict various subject matter. That became a very conservative school of art, and there was a tension between the work of artists like Caravaggio in realism and the Orthodox Art Academy, as it was called, with very classically oriented painting. And this tension developed after the Renaissance, and it continued for 200 years with essentially artists like Caravaggio being on the outs of the established art institutions. In the 1800s, that finally comes to a head, and it ultimately leads to Impressionism in modern art and the overthrowing of classical artistic ideas, that the classical ideas are the only ones to follow and the only ones that lead to the production of valid art. So that's a little bit beyond the end of this course, but you can keep in mind the fact that Caravaggio carries on some of the traditions of rebelliousness and exploring new things that the masters of the Renaissance initiated.